right, everybody, welcome to For the Love of Language, the best linguistics podcast out there.
Hey, yo!
I'm authentically EJ.
And I'm Stacy the linguist. Hello, guys. How you doing today?
Oh yeah, we're doing great. It's a Saturday morning, and we're here for you because we love language. We love talking about it, and I'm really excited about our topic today because we're going to talk about constructed languages, otherwise known
As conlangs. Conlangs. We're talking about conlangs.
Conlang is just abbreviated constructed language, and there's a ton of constructed languages. So like this is actually the field of conlangery is a massive, massive field. So I don't know, what constructed languages come to mind first for you, Stacey?
First big one that comes to my mind is Klingon from Star Trek.
Yes.
Some other popular ones are Elvish from Lord of the Rings,
Yes.
Dothraki from Game of Thrones.
J.R.R. Tolkien with Lord of the Rings is actually like one of the pioneers of conlangery. Like
Yes.
he is in a lot of ways seen as the father of the movement because he put in so much detail and attention into his created languages in Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Dothraki, Klingon, Elvish are kind of like the big three that I initially think of. And then the other one, Esperanto, is one that has really taken off. I unfortunately have not consumed the content from which that comes from. I'm not as familiar with it, but I do know that a lot of people are huge on Esperanto.
Yeah, I would say Esperanto is probably the biggest, best known constructed language that wasn't created for media. So you get these ones like Elvish, Klingon, Dothraki that you mentioned. Those were created for created universes, for stories and books and TV. Esperanto is different because the creator of Esperanto wanted it to actually be an international language. Like the idea behind it is that, if you had one international language that's easy to learn, simple, then, everything could just be translated in and out of that language instead of like, if you have even just like three languages, German, Spanish, and English, let's say, and you need to be able to translate between all three of them, then you're going to need like several different translators. This works better with bigger numbers as the example, actually, as far as like the exponential scaling of the number of translators that you need. But if every translator just knew their language in Esperanto, then theoretically, instead of having a translator from English to Spanish and English to German, you could just have one English Esperanto translator. Now, obviously, there's issues with that. There's a lot of reasons we don't actually do that in the real world, but that was part of kind of the recommendation behind it is like, let's actually have an international language that we can use.
Yes, a lingua franca of sorts, if you will, which is kind of a funny term in and of itself. And I think we can have another episode about lingua francas in general. I think that would be a good idea to talk a little bit more about that and how quote unquote global languages kind of come about. Needless to say, Esperanto hasn't exactly taken off as a global language and has kind of remained as like a conlang in theory. Like you said, it's a good idea in theory, but that's kind of the big, I hate to say it, but like issue with conlangs is constructed languages, because they are not natural, they don't take off as well. Like people have to put in active effort to learn them. And then what makes a natural language is when a child learns it. And a child learns it, grows up, and then passes it on to their children. And unfortunately, with a lot of these conlangs, I mean, I say unfortunately, but like morally speaking, it's just kind of a fact. It's not like good or bad. It's just kind of how things are with conlangs. The niche areas that they exist within, even if someone were to teach their child like Dothraki, that child is going to be immersed in a different linguistic environment because there's not enough people speaking Dothraki for it to be usable in society. And so the child would grow up, learn another language, and then the Thraki would be like a heritage language, something that they learned as a kid but they don't use anymore.
Mhm.
And so because it hasn't been like passed on, it's not a natural language. And I don't know if it could be, because again, they make up such a small portion of speakers. You would have to live on like a Klingon commune, in like a cult type thing for something like that to happen. And like, it could happen. It might have happened at some point,
But like,
but
why would you do that? Like, why would you make that life choice for yourself? And I think there are actually people that have tried to raise their children speaking Esperanto.
yeah, I
But
mean,
like,
most definitely.
can you imagine if that was your first language? Like, you would only be able to speak with this tiny, tiny group of people who have it as their second language. Like, it would be a really interesting
Yeah.
scenario.
And because it is often like another person's second, third, fourth language, they're a little bit limited, right? In what you
Mhm.
in what you know. Anybody who's multilingual knows that like your first language, or your first two languages, depending on how you were raised, you can pretty much talk about anything and everything in those languages. But in your additional languages, you can't always talk about like science or politics or religion. Like you're limited in what you can discuss.
You need to have practiced that specifically, which comes really naturally in your mother tongue because you need to be able to discuss everything. But unless you actively put effort into those smaller domains, you're not going to pick them up in other languages for sure.
Yeah. So while there is a lot of creative beauty in conlangs, I always hate to break it to people, but it's one of those things that, as great as it would be to have native Elvish speakers, it's highly unlikely given the world that we live in.
Well, Duolingo does offer Klingon, High Valyrian,
They do, yes.
Esperanto. I actually
Yes.
did Duolingo's Esperanto course. I haven't done their other conlanes, but if you are interested, you can check them out.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are absolutely people out there who dedicate their lives to building these languages, which is beautiful. I'm into it.
It's cool.
Um, Unfortunately, from a purely scientific linguistic perspective, they're not going to be interesting until we get those a couple of generations passed on through children. That's when these conlangs will really start to matter in terms of like linguistic relevance to
Mm.
scientists, because linguistics isn't the study of created languages. Linguistics is the study of human natural language. Like how does human language work in the brain? And when you create your own language, you're kind of like sidestepping the process.
I think that's a valid argument. I will say, usually, at this point, films, large stories will actually hire linguists and people who really know a lot about language to create their conlanes. Now,
Yeah,
I believe Star Wars is an exception. Star Wars had a sound technician create their languages, which is
true, but
why
they
they're very
did
different.
have they did have a signer for the those people who live on Tatooine, the sand people.
Mm.
The sand people, they had like someone who did sign, like create a sign language for the sand people in Tatooine. I do remember that.
Right.
So they had a person for that one,
Uh-huh.
a linguistically capable person. Not that sound technicians aren't
Right.
linguistically capable. You know what I'm talking about.
For sure.
Someone who's like from a linguistic community come in and give input. But yeah,
And I'm sure like the sound technicians creating the other ones also put, a lot of thought and effort into it, but it's just like a different creative method.
yes.
Versus like for me personally, one of the things that got me into linguistics was actually conlanes.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
again, no shade to conlangs.
right, yeah,
Like,
but in my linguistics 101 course in college, we had a big final project at the end of it, and our professor gave us like two or three options of what you could do. And one of them was to create your own conlang. And obviously, in a very limited scope, in Linguistics 101 covers the basics of
Hmm.
semantics, morphology, syntax, just like the very
Hmm.
basics of all
Yeah,
those.
what goes into language in general. Yeah.
Right. And so creating a conlang and like using all of those aspects in it is actually a really cool, fun exercise.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it, but obviously I didn't put any amount of depth into that, single course project that would be comparable to like what's gone into Esperanto or some of these other like really well developed languages.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, like I said, people put their whole lives into some of these languages, and mad props to them. Like human language in general is inherently very complex, and we need it to be, and we need it to be complex in just the right ways, in order for it to be successful. And natural language just so happened to work out where every language is naturally complex in its own perfect unique ways. And so it really is kind of a bit of a mind fuck to try and develop that own that complexity, especially if you're someone who's not a linguist and doesn't necessarily understand some of the inherent complexity and the amount of complexity you need to encode into such a thing. So the fact that it's even been done, and it's been done successfully, I think is a miracle of human innovation.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And there's some other interesting things about like I think we could touch a little bit more on Esperanto, for instance.
Mm.
The creator of Esperanto really heavily used Romance languages, with also some Germanic influence, threw some other stuff in there. But another reason why it hasn't been successful as an international language is like it's supposed to be all-encompassing, work for everyone. There's no representation of Asian languages. There's
Or
no
African languages.
African languages. Like there's so much that's just not touched. And if you did actually try to like combine every language in the world, then you would lose all sense of patterns and, existing things that make sense in the languages that you're drawing from. So it's kind of an
Exactly.
interesting exercise.
Yeah. Kind of to touch on that and a little bit more about like linguistic complexity. So, like I said, every language has its own flavor of complexity that's encoded in certain ways. And you can see this in areas like phonology, for example. So people are like, oh, Chinese is like so complex because it has these tones and stuff. Tones aren't like the tonal system is just a different way to add complexity, where other languages have a lot more consonants that we can use, and we just use like 20 different consonants. In some Asian languages, they use tones instead to encode some of that meaning. So the encoding just happens a little bit differently. But if you were to try and like add the tones from Asian languages, the tones from a lot of Bantu languages in Africa, some of the consonantal complexity from Arabic languages, some of the like complex, like gender stuff that you find in Romance languages, some of the concatenation that you find in Australian and Native American languages, like good luck. That's too complex and it's not going to be super successful. So to like blend all languages, it's like a big, probably not going to work.
Right. And then that goes against the ultimate purpose of like simplifying
Yeah.
it and making it easy to understand. And so you end up
Mhm.
with this dichotomy like, do you try to incorporate all languages or are you actually trying to keep it mathematically simple? Like,
Yeah.
what is the actual goal? And those goals conflict with each other.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point as well, like if you were to have the most simple language, and I hate to say it, friends, but there's no such thing. Every language has complexity. Even if you considered like basic phonology, some of the most phonologically simple languages out there, Hawaiian and other Polynesian languages, they're very consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. You have a minimal phonetic inventory, a limited number of things that you use, but there is complexity in how their word structure is constructed, right? Like you have these giant long words because if your phonology is simple, your morphology has to be complex. So there will always be an element of complexity in a language, and it's and I'm sure I haven't studied conlangs specifically, but each one of those conlangs is going to have its own special variety of complexity that has to be encoded somehow. There's no one way to make the most simple language possible, because
Definitely.
language needs to be complex in order to encode big abstract ideas like love and the universe and all these other things.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. Like Stacy and I are both of the opinion that like the absolute complexity of most languages is really similar. There's not like, maybe if you're coming from Spanish, Portuguese might be easier to learn because you're familiar with those structures and those concepts. But from an absolute level, languages do have similar complexity because the world that they're representing is complex. But a question that I have for you, Stacy.
Yeah.
You might enjoy this question, you might not. If you were to create a constructed language, how would you go about it?
Good question. That's a really good question. The way that I would personally approach it, because I've done a lot of phonological work specifically, I would start with the phonology. I would think about how I would want the language to sound, what I would want to incorporate. So I would start at that level of complexity first, and I would sort of make my way up the chain up into like syntax and semantics and how things should be. Well, semantics supposedly, we won't get into why semantics isn't part of the complexity of things. But I would kind of work my way up. So I think that if I were to write a conlang, it would probably have inherent phonological complexity, and then it would have probably more of a simple syntactic structure. And so a lot of my complexity would probably be within the phonology morphology, and have I guess a simple, more standard type syntax. Of course, there would be like some complexity in the syntax because, even if I were to base it off of English, there are some like nuances that are like weird or whatever. But that's where I would start personally, just because like when I think about a language, I think about how it sounds before like, how is it structured? But that's just me. Like, I'm sure everybody has like considered it in their own way, right? Like,
definitely.
Like a syntactician might be like, all right, well, I want to do VSO. I would love to have like a verb first language, which is a little bit rare, a little bit weird, and then maybe go from there and build complexity from the top down instead of from the bottom up.
Yeah. And you could totally create a language, starting with any of those aspects. Like you could start with those abstract syntactic rules, like you're saying. I personally also gravitate towards the sound of things. So like when I've done this and played with this in the past, I do usually start with, what are the phonemes? What are the sounds that matter in this language? And then like what syllable structures are possible from there, or what suffixes, affixes, are we going to have cases? Do we need to have patterns about, in Spanish, if a word ends with ar, er, or ir, it's probably a verb. If it ends with a or o, or, it's probably a noun. Are you going to have rules like that indicate, what type of word it is based on how the word sounds? You start from like the very, very basics, and you can create something like, you could create something totally weird, totally different from anything you've heard, just for the fun of like the mind game of it.
It very much is like a fun mind game, and that's mostly, like, scientifically speaking, kind of how I look at conlangs, of like, yeah, no, this is a great game that y'all are playing with each other. Like, I'm here for it. And to be fair, there is like an actual phenomenon called language games. They function a little bit differently than conlangs, but it's still like a way to play with language, and it's so cool to kind of like go off in a separate direction. It's so cool at the playfulness of humanity, of like, even at our most core with like language, we still want to play around with it. We still want to experiment and tinker and have fun with it. To give an example of like a common language game in English is the name game. The Anna, Bobana, Banana, Fana, Fofana, Eat Me, My, Momana, Anna, right? That's a language game where it's like, okay, how do you break up a name to fit within this structure? Like, like if you were to do Michael, Michael, Bo Michael, Banana Fano, Fo Fikel, me, my, Mo Michael, Bike Michael, right? It's a little bit of a tongue twister, and it like gets you thinking about how you parse out like names, what names might fit, what names might not fit, what would you have to do to the name to make it fit. And there are a bunch of other language games kind of like that in languages across the world. We love to play around and see how things like break language down a little bit, build it back up, and just kind of fuck around with it and find out.
Yeah. No, I'm inclined to agree for the most part. Like I think conlangs at this point are mostly fun because, we've tried out seeing if they can have other advantages. Like the one case where I can think of actually where a conlang is used in a really practical sense outside of just art, is probably I've heard that the military language test to test how good you are at learning languages is actually like learning a bit of a conlang basically as part of the test to like see if you can catch on to patterns and kind of predict how well you'll learn other languages. I haven't actually taken it, but I've heard that that's kind of the structure that it is.
That's super interesting. That could be a fun exercise for both of us to do. We could compare how we do, because for those who are unfamiliar with Stacy the linguist, even though I'm a linguist, I'm notoriously bad at language acquisition. Surprise! You don't have to like know a bunch of languages to be a linguist. I'm one of those people. I'm just not great at language acquisition. On the other hand, EJ is a master. They've been doing it their whole life.
I have a lot of experience.
Yeah. So that could be like a fun exercise for us to do at one point. But yeah, no, like and I've definitely heard stories of people who like go to like Star Trek conventions internationally and nobody shares a language except for Klingon, and they're able to like communicate with people through that language. And that's beautiful. That's wonderful. You love to hear about it.
Oh, yeah. And there's a ton of Wikipedia articles in Esperanto. Like there are people who are actually using these languages.
Yeah. They are not like, just because we're saying that they're mind games, language games, that they're kind of just for fun, they are practical. But unfortunately, like whenever I talk about conlangs, I just feel like I have to hit home. They're not natural languages. It's unlikely that they'll become natural languages. Would I love to see it? Yes. Is it just statistically improbable to happen? Unfortunately, like to have a child raised on a Klingon commune camp would just be a social experiment that should probably not be done.
Right, the ethics
there's
of that.
There's some ethical dilemmas with that, unfortunately. Otherwise, it could be a really cool adventure, but it's one of those things.
For sure. Well, one thing I would mention, there's one book on conlangs that I really like.
Oh yeah, give us some recommendations.
So it's called From Elvish to Klingon by Michael Adams. That's a book I would recommend if you're interested in the subject. We already mentioned Duolingo has conlangs that they offer if you want to kind of tinker with some. Yeah. So yeah, if you're interested, definitely play with them.
Absolutely. And I mean, Duolingo is not the best way to acquire a language, but if you're just curious as to what it looks like, how things are structured, it's a great introduction to it. And especially with well-developed conlangs like Elvish and Klingon, High Valyrian, Esperanto, there's going to be a ton of resources out there.
Oh yeah.
And it could inspire you to make your own conlang. I know people who are into like fantasy stuff like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, and other like role-playing games will also like build their own conlangs and play around with what can language be in fantasy worlds. And I think that is such an amazing and fun exercise to do.
Oh yeah, you'll also hear about, little kids creating their own little language to communicate with each other in secret. Like there's lots of places where it does actually pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, another another one that is, you wouldn't call it a conlang because it is much more of a language game, but it fits kind of within that spectrum. Do y'all remember Pig Latin?
Yes.
From so it's from a book, The Black Cauldron. You can also see the movie, but the movie's not as good as the book, if you ask me. But Pig Latin is
Like you take the first consonant and put it at the end with A?
yeah, ig pay at and lay. So you take the last syllable and you put it at the beginning and you add a at the end. So you have ig pay at and lay. You can't really do it with like names like yours, EJ, because it's just EAAJA. Like it doesn't quite work. But you can do it with like AC stay, they English right? Stacy the linguist in Pig Latin. That one is far more just like a silly little language game than like an actual language because it's coded like it's just a different coding of something.
Right, like you're taking an existing language and just making a
Yeah.
systematic, deliberate modification to.
Yeah. But like that was something I was introduced to when I was like 10 years old, right? And so even like as children, we like find these ways to kind of play with language and mess around with them and be like, oh, we're so secret and so smart because we're doing all these fun things. It's when
great.
Kids do it, it's fantastic too.
Right. And if adults do it, it's fantastic.
It's great.
Right?
We love it. We love playing with language.
Having fun. Yeah. Well, do you have anything else you would say to finish up here, Stacy?
I don't think so. Probably just to reiterate the point that like even though I personally don't think conlangs are necessarily scientifically interesting right now, they could develop into something interesting in the future. And that would be really cool to see. And they are valid languages in their own right, but they are very different from a natural language. And so I think that even those people who are just in love with conlangs do need to have like a little bit of like a reality check and be like, it's not quite the same, but I appreciate the effort. Well, I think that's.
And I don't think that everyone that is playing with these and creating.
Oh, for sure. I'm not saying that everyone is like obsessed and is like freaking out about this stup. It's just one of those like sometimes I get people coming into my DMs and I'm like quick reality check for you there. They're different. I respect and love conlangs, different from natural languages.
So yes, don't spam Stacy.
I mean, you can spam me. I may not respond, but
but no, like I love conlangs for what they are. Like I don't think you can study them the way that Stacy wants to study natural languages.
And that's okay.
They're cool. They're really, really cool. So that's what we have for you all today. Hopefully you learned something. Maybe you'll do something with it. Maybe not. Maybe you'll just appreciate the languages that you're seeing in films and books a little bit more because there often is a lot of actual complexity that does go in.
Oh yeah. Like people put in a lot of effort and I see that effort and I love it. I'm here for it. We stand effort being put into building complex fantasy worlds to engross our minds and teleport us away for a little while.
Like fantasy and art and games are important. So
yeah, they're absolutely important.
Well, we'll close out there, but thanks everyone and we'll see you next time.
Bye.